Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to today's Hindu News Analysis session. And before we can begin looking at today's chief articles from the New Delhi edition Hindu Newspaper, here's a quick announcement regarding a very valuable workshop that is going to be held on 16th March 2024 sharp at 6 p.m. only on our channel Byjus Exam Prep. Now here you shall be provided a free guideline regarding how to prepare for the exam, the right strategy, the right methodology. So do sign in for this free workshop and enjoy the maximum benefit for your preparation. Apart from that, I shall also like to remind you regarding the much awaited prelims test series. So target prelims is here for 2024 UPSC Civil Services exam. The description has been provided in the box or the link of this video. Do sign up, take the best advantage from it, and much later we shall also have a detailed answer discussion from the best of our subject experts. And now let's quickly see which news topics do we have here for analysis. For the mains perspective, we shall take up 3 articles, whereas for the prelims, I have selected a bunch of 4 articles that are very factual and data-based. So let's have a look at the very first article of the day, coming to you from page 10, the Hindu Newspaper, which corresponds with GS Paper 3, the Science and Technology segment. The article talks about the burgeoning or increasing problem of waste generation. While it's very common for the public discourse to be worried about the piling stock of solid waste, medical waste, has led to various kind of climate crisis. But this article takes a slightly new dimension because today we are going to talk about nuclear waste. Now we know that all the countries today are in a race to pitch a better nuclear deal, whether it be in the form of the state-of-the-art nuclear submarine or whether it be in the form of conducting any latest missile launch. Today, as the world's across various continents are rushing to improve and empower themselves with more better and sophisticated nuclear weaponry, there is a side effect that has been rather neglected. The problem is that all the leftover, all the debris, all the waste that is left behind due to so much nuclear potency being developed, how shall we deal with that? Do we have written, standard, systematic global protocols to do that? Or are they still being done in a random way? The biggest problem is why unsystematic dumping of solid waste could lead to some climate and human problems, but unsystematic dumping of nuclear debris could lead to nothing short of complete devastation. So, the article step by step talks about, in the first place, what is nuclear waste. Now, let's understand that the news is coming to highlight because India has now achieved another feat. After about 20 years of hard work and labor research, we have today reached a situation where the core of our prototype fast breeder reactor has been loaded. And this has enabled us to reach stage 2 of our very ambitious nuclear power plant program. So to understand what is the whole concept behind it, we need to know that PFRB, or the prototype fast breeder reactor, is that kind of machine which has the ability to produce more nuclear fuel than it takes as raw material or input. The purpose behind this feat is to enable India to utilize vast reserves of thorium and achieve complete independence in the field of nuclear power. Right. Now let's understand that when we talk about this nuclear power reactor, the prototype of this reactor, the main fuel that is used here are either uranium or thorium. Typically, the most common form of material that goes behind nuclear fission reaction that is conducted via these reactors to produce large-scale nuclear energy is supposed to be an isotope of uranium known as uranium-235. So 235 shall be the mass number here. The reason behind 235 being used is that this, when bombarded with any neutron in the reactor plant results in a chain reaction, a very powerful reaction where this readily breaks down into uranium-236. Now, uranium-236 is highly unstable. Highly unstable means it is immediately ready to split into much more smaller nucleuses. The more splitting happens, the higher gamma radiation is produced, and that precisely is utilized in this reactor machine. So, due to its highly radioactive and unstable nature of its nuclei, it splits electrons very easily, and hence it triggers a chain of fission reaction, and all these nuclear reactors are working on the concept of fission, nuclear fission reactions. Now, having said that, in the PFBR, the prototype fast breeder reactor, a particular kind of reaction is undertaken in a very controlled manner. Heavy water is pressurized and it is not allowed to boil. The pressure that's built up also produces massive amounts of plutonium-239, Pu-239 as a fuel, and side by side there is a massive release of heat energy. Now, either low or natural form of uranium-238 isotope is also used sometimes as the fissile material, which also readily yields a massive amount of Pu or plutonium-239 byproduct. Once it is loaded to the core of the nuclear reactor, it is covered with a blanket-like substance, and the fission reaction continues endlessly, and the energy resulted, and the energy that is coming out of it is exactly what we are looking for, and that gives us massive edge. So, lesser input went in, but a huge amount of energy was yielded from the PFBR. No wonder it is a very ambitious plan, but one thing gets neglected in the whole process. Agreed that it will enable us to use our vast reserves of thorium. Agreed that it is a process in which the byproduct receives is much more. The output is way higher than the input. But the problem which is getting neglected is every time a fission reaction takes place in such a reactor, until the fission chain continues, we will get energy. But what happens once the fission process reaches its saturation, when there is no more unstable nucleus left to further in fission? In that process, once the fission reaction stops, a situation happens when some fuel gets left over. That is radioactive, agreed, but not potent enough to cause further fission and more energy release. So what happens to this? This is sometimes also known as spent fuel. Spent fuel is that leftover or that leftover material that remains inside these reactors. The bigger challenge is how to deal with them, because typically they are waste. Why are they waste? Because they are not potent enough to be utilized further in your nuclear warfare program. You can't do that. So there are two ways of dealing with this waste now. One solution would be to actually go through the process of vitrification. The other solution happens when we talk about the process of recycling. In this case, a more technical word, reprocessing. So in two ways we can deal with this spent fuel or this waste. And this is not just an Indian problem, this is a global problem. Countries across the world have been facing this challenge of how to deal with the nuclear waste. It is not like any other waste. It cannot be left in open, because although it is a leftover spent fuel, it still has a lot of radioactivity in it. It can still cause massive radiation. It is ionizing. Once in contact with human body, it could lead to unimaginable side effects. Even for ecology, it can be very, very dangerous. So there are strict protocols globally, such as in 1993 onwards. These protocols have been repeatedly highlighted by various countries across the world. For example, the London Convention of 1972. We have the Basel Convention. We talk about the Marpol 73-78. These are all the global conventions which completely regulate, and they prohibit any kind of throwing away or reckless discarding of spent fuel. So in that case, what to do? Please understand that the spent fuel, this leftover fuel or the nuclear waste as we can dub it, is also of two kinds. One is the high level waste or the high end waste. This is potentially very dangerous. This has the highest ionizing impact. This is more concentrated. The other is low impact waste or the low level waste. While the low level waste can be discarded in safe places because it will not cause as much reaction for human and climate. The more problematic issue becomes the high level waste. Neither is it potent enough to, as I said, utilized for any military equipment, but nor is it weak enough to just be let go on. We have to do something about it. So in that case, what to do? Two processes are used to deal with it. As I said, one is vitrification. Under vitrification, the waste is systematically dealt with. For example, what you do, they actually keep it under the cover of certain kind of inert gas so that it is not leaking, and then they are packed into specific packaging material. Now, countries the world over today are facing the problem of piling up nuclear waste. Sometimes another process is also used, and India also uses this. It is known as recycling or reprocessing of nuclear waste. So under recycling, reprocessing, you can take as much nuclear fuel as much can be reused or recycled in the reaction breeder once again, in the nuclear power plant once again. But the weaker material or the weaker nuclear fuel that is left behind is then sometimes deposited, for example, in the borosilicate glass form, because it has very low prospect of leakaging. It's a very safe way of storing, and then sometimes it is either deposited somewhere or just discarded into the waters, the sea waters, because leakage is very, very less expected. Now what happens that nuclear waste being highly radioactive, and we are talking about the high level waste that is yet stored with the countries. Now the biggest tension becomes how to keep it stored for an endless period of time. It is hot and radioactive. It needs to be kept underwater sometimes, or as I said, to be completely covered by some thick inert gas. Inert gas is a non-reactive gas or noble gas, so that there is no leakage that happens. There is a zone created between the material and the external environment. Sometimes when it is cooled, it is transferred into dry storage tanks. Today, the amount of this waste has been stockpiling to an extent where US has about 69,682 tons as of 2015. Talking about Canada, 54,000 tons, and Russia, 21,000 something tons back in 2014. It is a tickling bomb. So nuclear power plants, although they also have an inbuilt facility, which is a very small liquid waste management facility, where the waste that is weak or the low impact waste is handled, and once it is little bit stable, it is discharged into the environment. But of course, it is monitored regularly. Now, as per the IAEA, the International Agency for Atomic Energy Regulation, Japan, for example, that's a very good example here. Now, talking about Japan, let's remember that in Japan, we had this massive nuclear leakage tragedy when, because of tsunami and storm, the Fukushima nuclear power plant, one of the rods melted down, and it posed a massive risk of toxicizing the environment. In that case, what has happened after years of dealing with the waste today, Japan is in the ready position to stabilize the waste, make it much less radioactive, convert it into very, very low impact nuclear waste, and it's ready to now discard it in the Pacific Ocean. But it doesn't mean that the fear is over. Even today, exactly what will this kind of discarding in the ocean bring about in terms of the impact it shall have on the life of aquatic animals and plants surrounding humans, the water cycle, the rainfall pattern, that is yet to be known. Now, similarly, seafood consumption is another grey area when we talk about countries ready to be discharging low impact waste in the sea waters. Now, high level waste, as I said, undergoes the process of vitrification. Sometimes vitrification also leads to creating gaseous material as a leftover, which is then stored in the form of a storable glass. So, talking about cylinders that are sealed completely shut, they are very, very tightly shut, or they are placed inside bigger steel containers, concrete chambers. The problem is that how much of this waste can we keep in special containers? Much longer back, countries like Russia and US were contemplating how is it to actually bury it, to deposit it under the sea surface. But then nothing was materialized because enough research was not taken. Today they believe sometimes you can bury it under the ground in a granite or a clay surface. But even then, the kind of impact it might have in case any leakage happens on the underground water or the vegetation or the soil quality is yet to be thoroughly understood. So some studies feel that, in fact, one of the very big researches that was recently conducted says that every country has at some point of time has experienced some kind of accident when it comes to storage of nuclear waste. For example, in case humans, because of undertaking some construction, agriculture or digging activity nearby the waste disposal site, they happen to get in touch remotely also with this radioactive material, it could lead to massive fatalities. Typically, whenever somebody is exposed to a radiation, the symptoms can show up anytime from 2 days to 2 weeks. And the results are abnormally very, very devastating. For example, since it is ionizing, it can lead to completely damaging the DNA of human cells. Not only could it lead to acute radiation syndrome that causes a host of bodily physiological experiences like digestive problems or burning in the skin, eventually leading up to death most of the times. It could also lead to cutaneous radiation injuries. In the long term, even if there is a survival that is possible, it leads to various kinds of bone marrow cancers because it's the bone marrow cells that are easily impacted and their DNA gets damaged very, very quickly once exposed to any such radiation impact. So reprocessing, as I said, is also something that India has been doing and considering for a long time, but yet a systematic protocol is missing. That is globally also. For example, in reprocessing, some material is claimed back, as I said. It's like recycling of nuclear waste, which is reutilized into another nuclear waste, nuclear power plant. But the high-end remaining material that is still dangerous, that is something that we need to do what to do about it. Does it need to be chemically treated to make it a non-fissile material? Or, as I said, could it be then stored in the form of a borosilicate glass and just be floated in the water? Sometimes, even after a lot of reprocessing, still it is ionizing. So it does demand a lot of safety, a lot of protocol, and the piling amount of nuclear waste right now is another major threat because ecologically also it could damage biodiversity of regions, it could lead to massive injury, even in terms of spoiling the air quality that people breathe. So these are certain things that the article has highlighted. In fact, article says that the side effects could be so dangerous tomorrow if there is any leachate or leakage that happens. It will lead to unknown unknowns, which means so many new side effects will happen which you cannot even think about right now. So therefore, exploring another issue interesting that the article talks about is that sometimes the rich industrialized countries that already have a lot of nuclear empowerment, they talk about exporting the nuclear waste. Now this is kind of a new colonialism. And whether you talk about carbon emission trading or whether you talk about nuclear radioactive waste trading, that the richer countries are able to export the waste into poor countries to take care of it. This is a kind of complete environmental health injustice. That is also something that the article says. The article also says that, talking about US, where, for example, there is a waste isolation pilot plant that was created in such a systematic way that nobody could have imagined that any accident will take place. But back in 2014, suddenly this plant started releasing very, very small quantities of radioactive material in the environment, citing some kind of failure or mismanagement in maintenance. So you see, these are problems that are a very major future threat, And apart from that, there is also another element. The cost that goes behind managing nuclear waste is again something that countries need to think about. At a time when there are other global challenges, how much is it viable to constantly put in more funding into just management of something like nuclear waste, which cannot be ignored either? For example, the management of waste from power plant operation to taking care of waste management would be almost about, say, 24% of the cost of entire benefit that it is giving. And similarly, the remaining 50% of the cost will also go behind taking care of things like recycling, storing the waste, arranging the containers, creating that much nuclear apparatus. So ultimately, the waste management will impose a cost of, say, about 1.16271 per MWH of nuclear energy, which in return will not be a very cost-effective option in either case. Talking about India, the same debates are being highlighted in the case of India as well, that waste generated normally is stored under properly created on-site facilities. But Say for example, today, according to 2015 report of International Panel on Fissile Material, India maintains 3 major reprocessing or nuclear waste recycling plants in Trombe, Tarapur and Kalpakkam. So as I said, all these have a proper on-site storage of nuclear waste facility. But the problem is surrounding area needs to be thoroughly surveyed and observed. Otherwise, a 2014 tragedy like US is not very far away. And let's also remember that these facilities have also been doubted upon. Like reports have also, the same institute has also highlighted a report which has said that maybe the efficiency of waste management is not very high, because if you talk about investment, then probably they have operated in a very poor way, because combined average capacity factor is about 15%, which means too much separate investment has not been done in segregating the waste properly. So how logical is that, and how much threat can it pose? How will the countries take care of this threat in the future, including that of India's ambitious nuclear program, are certain important things highlighted by the article. Now proceeding with the another important article for the day that has been picked up from page 8 corresponding to social justice. The article is coming in the wake of a controversy that is going on between the state of Punjab versus Davinder Singh case. Now here, the main essence of the article is that although the Indian government, right since 1950, right since the inception of our constitution, has given positive discrimination or reservations to scheduled caste and scheduled tribal groups. Much later, post the Mandal Commission verdict, we also had the OBC groups who were getting reservations, say up to the upper ceiling of 27%. Variable across various states. Apart from that, we know that from 2019, the criteria of reservation has just constantly been piling up, with EWS coming with a 10% quota, people with benchmark physical disabilities claiming about 4% quota. So, in that scenario, the article in one of its key highlights also questions that how feasible it is for so much reservation to actually continue in future. Because not only are we trying to go against the very famous Indra Sahni verdict that came in the light of Mandal Commission report, which said that even if we choose to give reservation in this format, it is all right if it's needed for empowerment, but talking about a particular state, the total quantum of reservation should not exceed 50%. But today, if you see the reality, long back, most of the states have already exceeded the 50% upper quota limit. So one question is, how viable is that? Is that something constitutional? Now, this also brings into picture the controversy regarding the 9th schedule of the Constitution, the Coelho case controversy, that many times state governments would refer to the 9th schedule of the Constitution, highlighting that even if they are crossing the upper quota of 50%, it should be protected from judicial review because it should be considered under the 9th schedule. But we know that another basic structure of Constitution is that judiciary can intervene in most of the episodes, most of the issues that are of chief concern to India's governance and polity, and therefore the controversy is ongoing. Now, in that light, the bigger concern this article highlights is that not only are we trying to cross the upper cap, that is one thing, how much benefit are we getting even by giving more than 50% reservation state by state? When you give a blanket reservation of about 15% to every scheduled caste group or individual in your state, or 8.6% blanket reservation to scheduled tribals in your state, do you think it's benefiting every individual equally, even among these SC and ST segments? Are they uniform? Are they experiencing homogeneity? Is it valid to say that every individual from scheduled caste community is equally poor? Is it valid to say that every single family who is getting the benefit under scheduled tribal quota, are they facing the same problems? Is there no economic difference between them? A very easy case that the article talks about is, for example, somebody coming from a scheduled caste background, but somebody who has people in class 1 government of services in their family, or somebody who has a prolific business, a lot of family land and property. How and why should they be considered poor? On the other hand, there are certain segments of scheduled caste population which today also are so deprived that even after these many years of reservation, they have not got any much benefit. So what we are trying to say is that if OBC has a categorization, or rather sub-categorization into creamy layer and non-creamy layer, that people whose family income or whose income annually is less than 8 lakh per annum will be considered as the non-creamy layer and they shall get the benefit under other backward class reservation. Remember, this is not caste, it is class. It's a much broader category, sometimes also known as socially educationally backward classes. That is what OBC stands for. It's a bigger word than class because it is not only corresponding with the Dalit community, but people from other religions and minority religions can also be represented in the SE, BC or OBC class. While talking about scheduled caste, as of now only the Hindu Dalits, Sikhs, Buddhists are the people who have got benefit under the scheduled caste. But the bigger question is, if in OBC we can use economic criteria for subcategorization, then why not in SC and why not in ST? It is not a new debate. But the article has come into light specially because of a demand by the state of Punjab, according to which Punjab government feels that there are two categories of castes in Punjab which are so discriminated against that they have a very, very poor social economic growth. This is when years have passed since we started reservation policy, that's back in 1950. So how do you explain that? Which means the benefit of SC reservation is not reaching everyone equally, and therefore the Punjab government wants that out of the total scheduled caste quantum, out of the total scheduled caste bracket of reservation, these two castes should get a higher share. But this is something that is not being accepted by the High Court. The High Court says that state government has no right to intervene and change or challenge the list because it is only a duty of the parliament, and the state government has no authority therefore to decide arbitrarily that who will get more quota under one single SC quantum and who shall get less. So this is what the article's main highlight is. Now, the article therefore is asking that can state governments make subcategorization if they feel that within their own state there are certain castes which are still very, very marginalized. So is it a valid question to create subcategory under scheduled caste by calling people, for example, some states were actually following this criteria in about dividing the scheduled caste also into backward caste or more backward caste or more backward caste. But that used to happen under the OBC segment, not typically under the SC segment. Today the question is, should SCs be also divided into more backward, most backward, and marginally or less backward? So this is something that the article is constantly talking about. The studies and the data highlighted by the article says that although scheduled caste and scheduled tribe are separate constitutional categories, both of them are protected under reservation policy. But let's assume they are not homogeneous. It's a bad thing to presume that all the castes and subcastes lying under scheduled castes are the same in terms of their achievement, economic growth and social growth, because they are not the same. And the most poor ones among them are suffering the most. Now a very easy example could be, now ever since we are talking about the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, let's go back to 2015. The government said one key target will be to abolish manual scavenging, right? Also, our Honorable Prime Minister said that manual scavenging is the worst surviving symbol of untouchability in modern India. But today, can we assume that manual scavenging is completely gone? It's not true, because even today we see that every week there are reports highlighting how many people are dying because they had to undergo the job of manual scavenging. That's the level of unemployment and caste-associated disabilities that people still suffer. So how can we presume, as per the state government's argument, that all SCs are the same? And hence, please let the state government take this call, because the state government understands better the dynamics of caste divide within a given state. Let's understand that caste is a very complicated system in India. It has various other subcastes, but it is not a pan-India system in the same way. Castes exist across India, but in every state the model is very different. For example, in certain states there are castes who get identified as OBCs. In other states the same caste could be scheduled caste. In some other states it could be a general caste, a general category caste. So there is no one model of understanding the intricacy of caste system. So a state government will always be a better judge in understanding that who is the most backward. Now, back in 2012 also, there were certain constitutional amendments like 102nd and 105th constitutional amendments. Please go through them and understand them. They are very important in this topic. That how the state's government were denied any right to add or delete list of other backward classes. But then, after a lot of protest and demand, the government once again restored the power with the state government to keep adding and suggesting which class of community should go to the OBC. If it is empowered, it can also be removed. right? In India, OBC has been a very, very fluctuating list. It's very flexible. Castes can come and go. Also, it's very flexible because it is very accommodative. Many religions are represented here because in India, religious conversion is a rampant episode. It's a very common phenomenon. But SC becomes more rigid. Not only do state governments have no power to regulate, also because in SC, arbitrary adding or deleting cannot happen. Since only few religions and few communities are represented, it is not that easy to change the list itself. But today the state government is asking that Article 14 of the Indian Constitution says that right to equality is applicable to each individual irrespective of caste, creed, religion, race, or you can say gender. But despite that, what is the use of giving positive discrimination if still the bottommost people do not get that benefit? So why don't you let the state government take the call here? So the state government feel that not only should we understand that in general the marginalized castes need benefit, but as I said, they are not homogeneous. So there are intra-group differences between them. What is intra? Intra means something that happens inside a group. It is opposite of inter. Inter means between two groups. Intra is inside one group. So there are intra-group discriminations also that are going on. Variables that are going on. And hence, denying the plea of Punjab government would amount to not letting the government move towards equality. Now, the issue also highlights one of the circulars that happened in Punjab in 1975. Out of the total seats that were reserved for scheduled caste, 50% of the vacancies were decided by the government to be given to Balmikis and Mazhabi Sikhs, highlighting that these are the most marginalized even among the scheduled caste. Let's also remember that as per the 2011 census, Punjab has the highest population of scheduled caste in India, approximately about 32%. So in that light, there are too many castes, okay? So the state government is ready to take a call now that these are the two most backward and they deserve a better representation. They don't get any benefit anyway. The remaining 50% could be distributed between the remaining SC categories because they are less marginalized. But the problem is, back in 2006, Punjab and Haryana High Court struck this down. It said it is not valid. Something similar also happened in 2004 in the EV, Chinaya versus State of Andhra Pradesh case. Even during this judicial case, what happened was that Andhra Pradesh Scheduled Caste Rationalization and Reservation Act was challenged by the court, saying that it is trying to challenge Article 341 of the Constitution that deals with giving special provisions to scheduled caste people. It said that how can the state government decide and notify scheduled caste? It is the job of the parliament to do that. But later, what changed the whole situation is that Supreme Court itself gave its own analysis a rethought. It thought about it, that in the previous history, when the Punjab and Haryana High Court or when the Andhra Pradesh Court, it challenged the state government's decision for helping its own people, the Supreme Court then suddenly had a change of heart saying that what is wrong in that actually? Maybe the judgments, that the Chinaya judgment or the previous judgment about Punjab was not a very well thought of judgment, because in one way, if you see, it is not trying to challenge Article 341 at all. All it is trying to do is to create better parity among people. So what's wrong in that? So therefore, the Supreme Court said that Indira Sahni verdict, which said that total quantum of reservation should not go above 50%. But it also never really said that, you cannot in future create any subcategorization into scheduled castes. And why are we being so rigid about it? Similarly, if subclassifications are allowed under SEBC or OBC, then why not for the backward classes? What is wrong in that? So therefore, the root cause of the matter is that it is the state government's collective responsibility alongside the central government to strictly endorse Articles 14 to 16, which talk about equality to all the citizens in matters not only of public employment, but for all practical purposes. So all citizens, even for that matter non-citizens, shall have a right to equality. So if this is read together as a code of equality, then giving people substantive equality. Now this word I had used in another Hindu analysis talking about women. Substantive means on ground, real. as opposed to just theoretical. If you want to give real substantive equality, then better understand the rationale of Article 1416 and allow the state government to do this kind of categorization. Only a state government has a microscopic understanding of local situation, and hence it is better suited to decide which caste. For example, in the case of Punjab, these two castes that we spoke about are the most deserving ones when it comes to any government welfare. So Article 341 is seen as a bar against subclassification, but it is a wrong way of perceiving it, because then it is also trying to challenge the whole commitment of India's constitution towards creating right to equality. So now government does realize, rather the government has been realizing, Supreme Court also has now given a thought that Article 341 does not prohibit any kind of subcategorization. It just says that state governments should not include or exclude caste from President's list of scheduled caste. But it does not say that certain castes should not get more benefit than remaining ones or the other ones. So therefore, if the state government today wants to give special favor to some caste only because its plight is very bad, then it is not saying that I will snatch the remaining castes or the remaining scheduled caste communities' right towards empowerment. It's not taking anything from anybody. It is just giving extra support to the more needy ones. So, in the case of Punjab, the Punjab government's decision to provide special benefit to these two castes is not trying to change or challenge President's list of scheduled caste. What it is saying that because the backwardness or the intra-group backwardness is too much for certain caste, for example Valmiki and Mazhabi, we can give them a little preference. That's all it is, to improve their representation. Maybe it's not even permanent, just for few years to see the substantive benefit. So once we see that these are not homogeneous categories, SC, STs, they have intra-group variable, there are people who are better, worse and much better among them, then we shall stop seeing this as an act of defiance or lack of compliance on the part of state government. So now today the question is, the courts have to examine whether actually castes like Valmiki and Mazhabi Sikhs are different from other castes really in terms of their situation given the entire president list on scheduled caste. So that's what the article highlights, a very interesting and relevant topic. The next article here has been picked up from page number 6. It talks about economy, and it says, in fact it highlights something that we have been discussing in the past few weeks, that recently some southern Indian states, now typically we are doing the case study of Kerala in this article. So the Kerala government has been complaining constantly against centre's decision to deprive it from funding that it deserves. Now let's understand that it's very paradoxical in some way, because the Niti Ayog's multidimensional poverty index that was released back in 2023 said that Kerala in fact is one of the best performing states when it comes to reducing multidimensional poverty. Per capita income is good. The state is a very well performing and a highly industrialized state. But in reality, its financial situation today is not good. So the paradox is clear that although it is typically not a poor state, but today Kerala's financial situation is very messed up. It needs more funds, which the centre government is denying. So the complaint has gone to the Honourable Supreme Court, and now it's up to the Supreme Court to see who's valid. The centre's argument that Kerala wants too much money, it is demanding for preference over other states, which is not correct. Or is Kerala's demand valid, that the central government has been acting with a very tight hand when it comes to devolving more funds to it? Once again, we are indirectly highlighting the state and the Central Finance Commission controversy regarding vertical horizontal devolution, as we spoke about yesterday. So what did the Supreme Court do? Here the Supreme Court has taken a very clear stand. It has requested the central government to be a little lenient to Kerala and understand that just as an exception, please give Kerala a huge corpus of fund. This time, for this financial year, because state government's condition is not good repeatedly, provide it with one-time bailout, let it soothe out the situation, let it get better. Next year, next financial budget, if you want, you can reduce it. You can act very strictly with Kerala as compared to other states. But just this time, please allow that leniency and stop being so rigid about giving more money for Kerala's budgetary needs. That's what the article is trying to highlight here. And the article is coming in the wake of the 31st March deadline that has been given by the Supreme Court to central government of considering Kerala's financial crisis this time as a special case, and hence to provide it a bailout. a huge corpus fund so that it can tackle its financial problems. Now, what does the central government feel? Central government is not happy about it. Central government feels that the court is being liberal only in the case of Kerala. With regards to other state, nobody has ever said that. The central government's policies have been perceived as fair when it comes to other states. Then why today only in the case of Kerala is so much liberty being given? So centre has been very reluctant here about the suggestion of the Supreme Court regarding being liberal with Kerala. So Kerala had also in fact much recently in February itself filed a complaint in the Supreme Court saying that centre government is completely twisting the federal structure of the country when it comes to financial sharing and when it comes to sharing of funds. And it said that this kind of attitude of the government of not giving enough money to Kerala, of imposing bans on Kerala's borrowing money from outside, has created a severe damage to its economy. Because Kerala, let's remember, was also, in fact, it has been consistently been battling with many natural calamities, right from flooding to worst impact by various kind of epidemics. So in that case, what the government feels is that too much money has been spent on public health and welfare. Today we are in need of money and the central government is interfering with our finances, not even letting us to make an independent budget. So also what Kerala says is that the central government has been unfair to us because it has imposed on us a net borrowing ceiling. That is, it has imposed on us an upper limit so that we cannot borrow money from open market through private resources. What the centre says that all states are the same. Centre says that recently Centre has observed that there are certain states like Punjab, West Bengal and Kerala who have been very, very poor when it comes to fiscal management. They have failed to manage their finances properly. It feels that what is the logic in spending too much money on welfare schemes, unnecessarily giving subsidies, being too open-handed when it comes to spending on, say, climate management or say for example solar energy installation or for example any welfare scheme or any subsidy. You are too liberal with spending on that and then a problem comes and suddenly you have no money to deal with even bigger and more important things like for example your budgetary needs. So the state government feels that borrowing money just to pay your debts is like you yourself are constantly falling into a debt crisis, a deeper debt of crisis, and you can never come out of it. So it is not a permanent advisable solution. So the centre also recently in fact had imposed certain norms on Kerala that it should not borrow money anywhere from outside India. Now very interestingly, today's Hindu article also speaks about one more case study on Kerala. It says that since Kerala has been experiencing a lot of climate problems, particularly the flooding problem and various diseases like whether you talk about Zika virus outbreak or how was it repeatedly infected by even Lyme's disease and other such disorders, that Zika virus, so many of such problems. So it's the diaspora, the Malayali diaspora, people from Kerala who live abroad. They are the ones who have in fact pumped in a lot of money. So that support has enabled Kerala to deal with all these problems, but there is a limit to it. Today, when the situation is bad, the only solution Kerala finds is to seek central help. So, which it feels it is not happening. So now Kerala also says that there is an act of 2003 known as Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. Under this act also certain unhealthy conditions have been imposed on Kerala. Kerala feels that to manage the public debt of the state is a state list subject. As per the Schedule 7 of the Constitution, which allocates subjects into union, central, union, state and concurrent list, the right to manage public debt of the state is a jurisdiction of state government, but under the Act of 2003, the central government has started interfering in that also. So this is kind of distorting federalism. It also says that under 246 article of the Constitution, whatever administrative authority the states have, centre should not have any right to interfere constantly in that. It is a distortion of fiscal federalism by creating unrealistic, unconstitutional limits and conditions so that the state cannot borrow money to manage and regulate its finances. And what the central government feels, it says that if one state defaults, it sends ripple waves of shock across the entire fiscal system of the country. When one state is having a crisis, it manifests in poor allocation to other states also, because we are dealing with the integrated financing or devolution system. So in that case, The central government feels it has not defied its limits or exceeded its limits. In fact, it is only giving a logical advice that if you cannot manage your finances better, there is no use to borrow money, because further it will only complicate the problem. So now, Center says that the credit ranking of the entire country comes under threat when such problems happen, whether it be in Punjab or in West Bengal, or as of now that's happening in Kerala. It also says that Kerala, in fact, has had a fiscal system which is having too many cracks, too many loopholes. It is not being done properly. So it is this controversy that's going on. And also this raises a lot of questions about the future decisions of the 16th Finance Commission, on whom the big onus has come to sort out these complaints that are consistently arising from the states. And now let's proceed with an article from the prelims perspective, coming to you from page 14, corresponding with Science and Technology. We are talking about how, according to a report yielded by SIPRI, Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, that is a Sweden-based institution, and it has released a report for 2019-2023. And it has said that India is among the top countries when it comes to importing arms, weapons and ammunition. So this report highlights a very bigger issue, and that issue is that, as even highlighted by the recent interim budget rolled out by the Finance Ministry, India in the last few years is not only a leading importer of weapons, but also India is one of those countries which is rapidly expanding its nuclear and military, naval, air force base. It is completely tightening up its defense system. Now, this is coming in the wake of bigger geopolitical realities. So, not only does India experience intrusion threats from China, it also constantly experiences a kind of insecurity between the Indo-Pak border. Coupled with that is the constant problem of internal security challenges, sometimes which also need for the government to deroute or to allocate its defense services to solve internal emergencies. Plus the upcoming elections, which also is a very sensitive period for India. Is it valid, or the government is in fact doing a little too much by spending so much on defense? So this, as per the article, is the typical bread versus gun debate, that should we spend more on food and pharmaceuticals, or is it valid to spend so much money on defense itself? So as per the data highlighted by this article, India is today one of the top importer of arms and weapons from the period of 2019 to 23, and total Indian imports on arms itself have gone up by 4.7% when we compare it with the previous 4-year period before 2019. At the same time, let's remember, not only India, there are certain countries such as Saudi Arabia and Qatar, Asian countries and Oceania in the Middle East, who also are becoming major importer of arms. Let's also understand that globally also, the geopolitical situations are nothing short of challenging. Now recently we saw how the Houthi rebels were causing a massive strike in the Red Sea area that not only posed threat to supply chain and economy, it also was posing a major threat to most of the countries in the region. It was destabilizing peace, as US was taking actions against Yemeni-backed Houthis. It was creating a terror wave in the entire area. Ongoing is the crisis between Russia and Ukraine. On the same on the same page, we have another conflict brewing up that's very, very intense as of now. Like recently, we came to know how Israel has created a road splitting Gaza into two. So the Palestine-Israel conflict is already rising. It's swelling every day. So in such insecure the overall very, very unsafe and very, very insecure geopolitical climate, it is only valid that countries have increased their total build-up of arms and ammunition. So most of the times, let's also understand that European countries have also been rising as major arms exporter. In fact, arms export in European nations increased to 94% in just the period of 2018 to 2023. This is very, very clear that all the NATO countries have also increased their arms import due to the fear of the war between Russia-Ukraine. So as the relations are soaring between Russia and the NATO alliances, it's very valid that these countries in defense will create a strong military base, because we know that the consensus, and there is a kind of tacit agreement always between Russia and China. So if they are empowered, the other countries are likely to spend more on their defense budget. Similarly, Ukraine Indeed, it's involved in the war, so was also the fourth biggest arms importer globally. And let's understand, talking about India. Now, India in the recent budget has allocated about 6.21 lakh crore of rupees only for defense sector. Let's understand, this is a clear 4.3 increase as compared to the previous budget. So as per the Indian government, the demands are clear. The biggest reason of such an increased bracket is indeed the China and the Pakistan threat. Plus also constantly China's navigation, China's monitoring of the Indo-Pacific area has also caused consternation and worry among the nations that are in the region. China's action in the South China Sea. These have also led to a situation where Indian government wants to further enhance its naval potential in a very, very big way. In fact, all the recent exercises that were conducted as a part of Quad and those Malabar exercises were just an example of that. So today the government feels that not only does Indian military has to be modernized, it has to be modernized particularly in line of artificial intelligence technology. It has to be modernized in terms of quantum mechanic modernization, quantum computing mechanization. There has to be digital footprint to India's military arsenal. And these are certain reasons why today India is in the top spot when it comes to importing all these weapons. Now, although for a very long time US and Russia were the largest suppliers of weapons into India, recently France has emerged as a major supplier of arms into India. Even globally today, France has emerged as world's largest supplier of arms and ammunitions. This has suddenly happened after the Russia-Ukraine war phase has got initiated. So today, among the top 10 arms exporters of the world who have huge capacity to export, of course, the leading will be US, and then we have UK, China, Germany, Israel and Spain. But interestingly, in just the last 2 years, their overall expenditure on defense has come down. Probably it could highlight a saturation of capacity. But on the same time, parallelly, there is a sudden increase in the capacity of countries like Saudi Arabia, India and Qatar, the newly militarizing nations. So this is what the article talks about. And now let's move to another article from page number 9, GS paper 2, Social Justice. And we are talking about a paradox once again, that the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index said that globally the rate of poverty is declining. Most of the countries have successfully been able to reduce their poverty rates, but not all the regions in the world have been equally benefited. The article under picture is highlighting the Sub Saharan African region, and this is one area that has been barely benefited by poverty reduction. Today also, owing to high population growth rate, owing to high coups, military armed rebellions, insurgencies, radicalization, extremism, and severe climate impact, poverty, these nations of Sub-Saharan Africa, typically the Sahel regions, have not been able to escape poverty. These are today the poorest countries of the globe. The name that are used for these countries is Fragile and Conflict Affected States, or FCS. This is what the article highlights through data. The article says that in the last 30 years itself, the world has been able to reduce poverty in a very brilliant way, especially in the developing nations like India and China. But the model of India and China is not applicable everywhere, because today all the countries have not benefited equally. Now, when we talk about expanding manufacturing and service sector of China, India, Vietnam, parallelly we should also consider that Sub-Saharan Africa is having a situation of extremely low per capita income. This is an area where majority of people, let's understand, as per the article, 80% people are living under USD 2 per day. Similarly, the total poverty incidence has not declined too much. There is absolute poverty to be seen in these areas. So, in this particular region that we are talking about, let's remember that this is also the Sahel belt or the Sahel region. In local language, Sahel means the shore. Geographically talking, this is the semi-arid area, the semi-desert area of Western and North Central Africa, that typically expands from Senegal to Sudan. This also sometimes acts like a divide between the dry Saharan desert and the humid savannas of the African subcontinent. So it is these countries. Interestingly, these are also the countries that can be called as the coup belt. What is the coup belt? A term that was coined as recently as 2020. It refers to a group of countries in the Africa where many internal ethnic complexities and violences have been happening repeatedly. One is the Islamic extremism in the region. Second is tribal insurgency in the region, how tribals themselves are rising for self-defense because there is no proper government in place. There is constant migration, and the hunger index is extremely abysmal in this area. Child mortality very high, maternal mortality very high, child stunting, child wasting, that is very poor nourishment of children is also being witnessed here. Typically these countries are dependent on global aid, UN aid, but that also gets sometimes damaged, obviously, because the world is experiencing a war. So sometimes even supply chains disruptions have led to more and more poverty and hunger crisis here. So according to Global Hunger Index, some of these countries, which typically include countries like South Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, Malawi, Mozambique, Guinea, Zambia, Burundi, Congo, Madagascar. Since these are the FCS countries, 50% of people here are poor. As I said, 80% are living under less than $2 a day. Besides, according to Global Hunger Index, Chad is facing an alarming level of hunger. It is so severe that it is already being characterized under serious level where people literally have no food to eat. Additionally, undernourishment or malnourishment, hidden hunger, protein hunger, causing child death and child malnourishment is also very high in Chad as compared to other Sahelian countries in the Sahel region. Added to the extremism and coups, repeated military warfare is the problem of climate change. Now let's remember, back in 2021, Oxfam had released a very interesting case study which said that today most of the sub-Saharan countries are experiencing the 3C crisis. The 3C crisis was the crisis between climate change, COVID pandemic, and conflict. Caught up between these 3C phenomena, these countries have barely been able to rise above poverty. So that is something that the article was highlighting, that the need of the hour is to promote local level empowerment. The need of the hour is global aid and somehow better democracy, lesser climate change. So all these regions could possibly benefit from that, but of course it's a far cry because modern day reality is very ugly, highlighting the fact that even globally, poverty reduction is very non-uniform. Now with this we proceed to an article from page 14. It's a very short, crisp, fact-based article which says that recently the Central Drugs Standard Control Organization, the CDSCO, has cautioned, in fact it has warned various pharmaceuticals in India against manufacturing any drug that is unapproved by the government, because most of these drugs that are not approved by the government are experimental in nature. They have been given the name of new drugs. The problem with them is that new drugs have yet not passed sufficient studies and research, sufficient trials, and launching them in the market could be very dangerous. Now, remember recently another issue was raking up when Indian made cough syrups, most of them containing an ingredient called polythene or that polyethanol kind of substance. So that was something, or polythene glycol, that was probably causing so many health problems among children in certain other countries, and eventually many pharmaceuticals were banned. So now again we are having a situation where there are many pharmacies, typically the private sector pharmacies, sometimes who are introducing drugs in the market which contain certain substances such as Meropenem. Now, Meropenem is a very well-known antibiotic, which means it is an antibacterial drug that is a broad-spectrum antibiotic. It's used to kill many different kinds of bacteria. But the problem comes when drugs like Meropenem is coupled or paired with another drug that is known as Disodium. Now, what is Disodium? Disodium is a kind of drug that is often used to deal with kidney problems, uric acid problems, where there is too much calcium or calcium deposit in the body. Sometimes it's used to also treat urinary tract infections, very common it is. But when the combinations come together, what impacts will it have on human body are yet to be understood. So therefore, what the organization CDSO has said that kindly stop manufacturing such drugs, and in fact, even if any drug includes the combination of both of these, as the basic ingredient, then also it should be immediately called off, because this is yet to be studied and hence it is absolutely not safe to be sold. People have to be creating awareness about any kind of mal exercise or any kind of malintent by any company, so that public health is not endangered in the long run. With this, the last article of the day is page 16, talking about Indian economy. Again, it's a very short factual article. It's in fact a report which says that this January onwards, the industrial growth in India has fallen down dramatically. In fact, it has fallen down to 3.8% in this quarter. The main reason highlighted by the article behind this fall down are two. One is a very poor performance in the manufacturing sector, and the other is low private and low public capex expenditure. Capex expenditure means capital expenditure. Typically expenditure that's done on things like machinery development, industrial goods development, or any kind of essential commodities. So that also has come down. So manufacturing and production, if they are stunting, then naturally it is bound to manifest in a low economic growth. It has fallen down from 4.5% previous December 2023 to now a meager 3.2%. So what also it highlights is that there are certain sectors of the industry of Indian economy, such as mining, electricity. They are doing quite well. Similarly, FMCG sector, that is performing quite well. Consumer durables, the growth has jumped up suddenly. But there are certain other segments. For example, capital goods segment. This is a segment that is steadily falling down. Similarly, computer electronics and optic products, they are also experiencing a steep fall in their manufacturing among all the 23 manufactured goods which are slowing down as of now. So electronic sector or electronic appliances manufacturing sector has also performed very, very poorly. And similarly, production of wearing apparels, electronics, it also fell from 17.5% to 14% just in less than 1 year, up to January 2024. So what it highlights is that recently, after the budget came, a lot of economic policies, in fact, have led to a sudden realignment of economic performances. Apart from that, the election is upcoming. Now, more than that, this is also the beginning of financial year. And for private sector companies, many of them are also making loss right now. So somewhere consumer demand fluctuates. And if consumer demand fluctuates, it is bound to reflect in the manufacturing side, supply side as well. So overall, it is something that may see improvement in the future, but as of now, typically the segment of electronic apparel, rather public capex spending and individual capex spending has completely hit a bottom low, a rock bottom low, and that has manifested in overall poor industrial growth. That's just what the article highlights. And now let's quickly have a look at two mains questions. The first question here talks about what are the challenges or problems associated with management of nuclear waste across the world. That's globally. It is clearly a highlight that we have picked up from today's first article, that what is nuclear waste typically? Why does it become a problem? Due to its radioactive and ionizing nature, and hence what protocols prohibit countries from just leaving it unattended, unauthorized in sea or any other water body, or even just like that on land. We can also talk about basic challenges regarding human health, climate health by highlighting examples like, for example, Japanese, the Fukushima incident. We could talk about the leakage of 2014 in US, very well-known nuclear power plant. So what is India really doing? We can talk about processes like vitrification, we can talk about reprocessing, also certain other suggestions which could enable us deal with the challenge better. And the biggest challenge is today countries are having huge stocks of it, but how to dispose it probably 10 years from now could be a very, very big issue because it's very dangerous. Now, second question here says, can a sub-classification, or rather we can use the word sub-categorization for it. I'm sure you understood which article we are talking about, the article on the Punjab controversy by requesting the government and requesting the courts, a plea by the state government to the courts of allowing Punjab government to give special preference to two backward castes inside the scheduled caste quota. So, can a sub-categorization within the entire proportion of reservation given to scheduled caste and scheduled tribes in India enable a better social economic development? Will it lead to more equality? So typically, please talk about the sub-categorization in scheduled caste, highlighting article 343. Highlighting the article that we discussed, yes, right from Article 341 onwards, you could talk about how in OBC, if there is categorization, then why not in SC, ST? What debates are surrounding it? What does the Supreme Court today observes in this regard? What is the argument given by the state, and how eventually the Indira Sahni verdict had not refused anybody to give such a subcategorization? So we can talk about all those things and how probably it will lead to a situation where all backward castes will have a better representation rather than just one layer which takes away all the benefit repeatedly generationally and the others are left untouched. So that's all for the day. I thank you so much and I hope you enjoyed the session. See you very soon with other such exciting segments. Thank you.